After creating the Advanced Power Armor Mark I, the Enclave needed to ensure that their troops could be guaranteed survival with an even more advanced suit of armor. But like all advancements in technology, there must be a prototype. The last Power Armor prototype the Enclave made was a pretty decent suit, and while it was no T-51B, it was a solid foundation for the Mark I's development. But because the Enclave had already survived the nuclear holocaust that ended the time before the Wasteland, they had experience with surviving treacherous environments. Using their knowledge of this new world, they would create an advanced prototype suit of armor to aid them in surviving the wastes. Their new prototype would be so advanced that despite it not being complete, it was still stronger than the mighty T-51B, and would even be stronger than some models that were made after it. So without any further ado, let's uncover the lore of the X-01's predecessor, the X-02.
There are tales littered all across the wastelands of the old world. Within these tales are secrets, knowledge, and legends waiting to be told. I've traversed the boneyards of once great cities to collect these chronicles of post-apocalyptia. Some of these stories are beyond logical reasoning. Are these just radiation-poisoned brains conjuring up these myths, or is there some truth to be found in them? Only you can decide, as we step into the haze of Wastelord's legends.
The X-02, unlike the X-01, was so advanced and created so well that when it was done being tested and was turned into an official model, the suit had hardly changed at all. So why was the X-02 such a successful model? Well, first off, it was designed during the Enclave's peak on the West Coast. It was during this time they had been developing and testing all sorts of new advancements. Secondly, the Enclave had been using the Advanced Power Armor Mark I with great success, and had been able to see where it succeeded and where it failed. With this at their disposal, it is no wonder that they were able to design such an impressive prototype. While it is impossible to say when this model was made, my guess is around 2220 to 2241, with my estimate being 2225 to 2235, as the Mark I was created in 2220. This would be the most likely time, as the Mark II was already created by 2241, but was in very low numbers, with only one of them being owned by the Chosen One. The history of the X-02 is probably the most confusing aspect out of any other official Power Armor models, as I hadn't found any mention of it prior to the year 2287, where multiple suits had been found in the Commonwealth. So you may ask yourself, Wastelord, how are you assuming any of this if you barely have any evidence of it? Well, Wastelander, let me tell you exactly why I am certain of my belief of this armor being made on the West Coast, despite some sources claiming it is actually a newer suit than the Mark II. First off, the Enclave made experimental armors designated with an X before their number, and because I'm semi-decent in counting, I know that 2 comes after 1, and it wouldn't make any sense for the Mark II to just appear without any prototypes before it, and it just so happens that the X-02 is almost identical to the Mark II, meaning it had to be made before the Mark II. Furthermore, if we want to throw logic out the window and rely only on empirical evidence, then I will gladly provide it. Before we dive into the lore of the X-02, you must know that the Advanced Power Mark II that was produced on the West Coast was far superior than the Mark IIs that were created on the East Coast. Because the details are irrelevant in this broadcast, I will address them later on when I discuss the lore of the Advanced Power Armor Mark II. While it is very confusing, I can say with almost absolute certainty that the X-02 was created by the Enclave on the West Coast. There are many reasons I believe this. Firstly, due to its name, it seems as though it was likely created as the next prototype after the X-01. Another reason this would make sense is because this armor was being actively used as a much stronger alternative to the Mark II on the East Coast, means it is far closer to the original model that was based off of it, as it was most likely made in a very similar way to the original Mark II on the West Coast. While confusing, I have found evidence that proves this armor is in fact an older model, as well as a new model that was being developed by the East Coast Enclave. The evidence I discovered that proves this is a rather new prototype was found in the Commonwealth, in the Mass Pike Tunnel, on a terminal that belonged to an ex-Enclave Special Forces member. The soldier wrote, "As a Special Forces unit, we were given access to new prototypes, the crown jewel of which was the X-02 power armor." Reading further into this terminal, He mentions abandoning the Enclave and writes, "At first, I wasn't sure if they'd come after me. The suit was valuable property, one of only a handful of modern X-02 prototypes. But the colonels were facing issues on a number of fronts. As we can gather from this, it is obvious that there are different generations of the X-02, meaning that this model would have been made after the X-01 and therefore would have been what the original Mark II was designed off of. As the soldier mentions, the armor has older models, and as such, I believe that they were likely recreated by the East Coast Enclave using schematics and older suits from the West Coast chapter. This prototype, unlike the X-01, is a matte black, and the overall design of this model is incredibly insect-like in appearance. The leg design of this model has large flat feet and boasts exposed shocks on both segments of the legs, likely to help with mobility, weight distribution, and shock absorption. Moving up the armor onto the waist, it is completely solid, and it is layered over itself to allow for mobility, while keeping the midsection heavily armored. This was a new design in power armor technology, and it got rid of a severe weak point of previous models. Still looking at the midsection, there's a strange looking belt system, and while I'm unsure of its purpose, it likely holds the armor together better. Moving up the chest area of the armor, it is angled inward, likely to help with reducing impact, as well as it has a very solid beam in the middle, with a large area to hook things to it. This prototype ditches the hump of the X-01 and Mark I, and rather returns to the classic look of having pauldrons on the shoulders that add increased protection. This model also goes back to the original design of having only 2 tubes rather than many coming out of the helmet, and unlike previous models, this armor doesn't have any large tubes coming out of its helmet, as it only has 2 small tubes coming from the torso of the armor into the face mask of the helmet. The 2 large tubes this model does have stay on the torso of the suit. While it is hard to say if this has any benefits to the operator, it sure does look like this would allow the user to be more mobile when looking around, as this frees up the helmet even more. While this prototype seems to be leaps ahead of all other suits before it, one thing I find to be quite lacking is the helmet being incredibly smaller than all other models. And while this would undoubtedly add to mobility, I can only think about its potential downside of being less protective, especially when considering shock absorption of attacks to the head, as rather than acting as a chamber for the head to rest in, it looks more like a traditional helmet that conforms around the user's head, likely making the user more susceptible to concussions, whiplash, and other neck injuries. The helmet continues the trend of looking like an insect, and the top of the helmet has a strange piece that faces the front of the armor. While it is impossible to say for sure on what it is, I have a few ideas. The first being an additional light, however I haven't seen it on. The second possibility is it being a sensor to aid the user, and the last and best idea I think it could be is it works as a radar dish or transmitting device. The helmet also has 2 horn-like protrusions. Other than being the reason it would get the nickname of Black Devil, I am unsure what these horns could be doing. Although looking at the back of them, it is clear they have a purpose, as they look like exhaust systems. The helmet also has the standard Enclave polarized eyepieces that act as the armor's headlights. While alien in appearance, the X-02 functions as any other model of power armor, as it rests upon the same frame as the others that give it supernatural-like strength, the ability to stabilize the user, survive falls of unimaginable magnitude, and absorb the kinetic energy of attacks. The armor itself has an air filter, communications system, a waste filtration system, and excellent protection from radiation. When comparing the design of the X-02 to the Mark II, it is almost identical, with a few notable differences. The first is the chest piece now has a circular cutout on it that is reminiscent to the ones found on the pauldrons of the T-45 and the T-60. The next is the thigh area of the armor has shorter shocks than those found on the Mark II. The belt tube around the armor is also much less defined. It doesn't have holes on its exits, and rather it just looks like a belt. And the last difference I found is the helmet's horns appear longer and there are exhaust ports. Unlike the X-01, the X-02 has the ability to be upgraded with a Tesla variant. This variant is identical to the Mark II's Tesla variant, however likely because it is only a prototype, it doesn't offer extra protection or damage, and it instead is only capable of shocking nearby enemies. This variant forgoes the standard black and covers the suit in a copper finish, and has wires and bulbs all over it that look exactly like the Mark II's Tesla, but without the neat electricity shooting all across the armor. Other than a Tesla variant, there is one other smaller variant for the torso that looks similar to the Tesla and acts the same, with the addition of allowing attacks to give the suit more energy for movement, as well as allowing it to move 5% faster. This is known as the Devil's Inferno mod. The X-02 Power Armor, while not much different from the Advanced Power Armor Mark II, is an amazing suit, and is one of the best sets of power armors to have ever been made, as it was not only used by Enclave Special Forces units, but it was also so well made that despite it being a prototype, it was still stronger than the pre-war's most advanced set of power armor, which is an impressive feat when considering it was created after the world was destroyed. Scavers, that has been all the lore for the X-02 for this video, but now let's look at more information from outside the lore. First off, the X-02 was introduced in Fallout 4's Creation Club, and while some may consider this non-canon, I strongly disagree, as there are only a few Creation Clubs that are non-canon, and I'm sure these could probably be considered canon if we really look into them, as it kinda depends on whether or not Bethesda says so, and through what the game shows us, as is the case with the X-02 being lore-friendly, as well as straight up being added to the game in the most recent update, without needing to purchase the Creation Club. One of the loading screens in Fallout 4 has this to say about the armor. The X-02 series of power armor was specially engineered for the Enclave's Department of the Army, one of the most technological advanced paramilitaries in the world. The lightweight composites used in its construction give the X-02 a speed and agility advantage over its predecessor, the X-01 power armor. This is another piece of evidence I use, other than common sense, to come to the conclusion that the X-02 was made before the Advanced Power Armor Mark II, rather than after. Folks, that has been all for this video. If you want to see more, be sure to subscribe and like this video so I know I should make more. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and may the Wasteland treat y'all with peace and prosperity.